Over the last 5 years, looking back, I've had a lot of time to look back lately. And I thought, I've changed in a lot of ways, and I can actually tell that I've grown in some ways. But when I'm looking at myself, I realize there's parts of me that haven't grown. There are parts of me that have been left behind. And so I thought to maybe give you a physical image of that, if you can imagine like just a bodybuilder that's only bulked on one side, and this other side just looks completely disproportionate. Something looks wrong with this person. So kind of tonight I want to take a couple minutes and I want to talk to you about the way that I've tried to consider this imbalance that I have, and maybe it'll make sense to you as well. This is the first half of the first psalm. It says, "Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord," out of our Romans 7 tonight, by the way. "And in his law does he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bring forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper." So that's just words. I want you to put a picture of this tree in your mind. And I'm going to see if it compares to anything that I have on the slides that follow. What does this tree look like? To my friendly Californians over here, you might think that's the grandest tree that earth has to offer, is a California redwood. Or to my Floridian brethren over here, those live oaks, that is just the grandest tree that can be seen. Magnificent. They're massive, aren't they? Hundreds of years old. And I thought, well, maybe we can go beyond that, and we said, well, that's just, a standard everyday, maybe that's a Tennessee tree right there, one of our old maple trees. But it's so symmetrical, it's so beautiful on the plain there, it looks really majestic, it looks, balanced in every way. It's beautiful and it's ideal. And so I thought about this looking at myself as this particular tree. And I thought, well, what if I look like this? What if I had no trunk? That'd be more like a bush. There's nothing majestic there, right? I mean, it doesn't look right. And my poor Photoshop skills over here. But what if it was all trunk and just a little bitty canopy? I think the first time that the wind blew, this tree is going to snap in half. So there's a problem. It seems a little ridiculous, but we see in God's creation a necessary balance between, say, the canopy and the trunk. But there's a little bit more to this tree that's in the first psalm. But we do appreciate, don't we, all this symmetry. So I'm asking you the question, is that tree, that we saw out on the plain, like that diagram there, is that really the reality? Because there are other aspects of trees, yes? I mean, a tree has height. A tree has width, of that canopy. It has girth, that diameter of the trunk there. But unlike the pictures that we've seen and the diagram that we've seen, trees have depth. And that's what the first psalm touches, is the depth of that tree. Otherwise, what good is it that tree is by those rivers of water? What's the point? So I looked it up because I didn't know. And so this is free to use, by the way. I didn't have to cite that. It said it was free to use. But if the canopy, however big it is, the root depth really, 90% of them are in the first 3 feet under the dirt. But you see the width of the roots of this tree. And it can be anywhere from 1.5 to 4 times the width of the canopy. So you go back and imagine those live oaks out there in Florida. If you can imagine how big the root structure in those trees has to be. And, we might look at this picture like we did some of the ones that I played with in the Photoshop, and we might say that's a little imbalanced. But actually, that's the reality. That's the way that God made the tree. And I think that's what he's talking about in the first psalm. So the tree is multidimensional, height, width, girth, depth. But shouldn't the person be also? Shouldn't the person be also? So I thought we appreciate visual symmetry, but God's view is one of purposeful proportion. He designed it to do something, and in order for it to do that something, he designed it to accomplish that purpose. Jesus talks about this just a little bit, okay? And also this tree brings forth its fruit in the season. That's what I wanted to touch on, the fruit here. I got some dark sections here because you know this parable of the sower, and this is Jesus' explanation of the parable of the sower. So he says, but he that received the seed in the stony places, the same is he that hears the word, and anon with joy receives it, yet he hath no root in himself. Here's Jesus on that root. But he endures for a while, but when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, by and by he is offended. So it says that he also received the seed among the thorns, right? Here's the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and here it is, he becomes unfruitful. But he that received the seed into the good ground, you see that hears the word, right? And then it says he bears fruit. We talked about this in class tonight, the kind of fruit. And he brings forth some 100-fold. That's a lot. Some 60. That's a lot. And some 30. I go to the parable of the talents and I see like a 1 and a 2 and a 5. And I'm thinking 30, 60, and 100. That is a lot of fruit. And then I ask myself the question, well, what fruit? Which is actually what we talked about in the class tonight. So, the fruit of the Spirit, right? Okay, what is it? It's love, it's joy, it's peace, it's long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. And somebody said, well, in this analogy of being married to Christ and bringing forth a fruit in that sense, well, we're bringing forth more children for God. Try doing it without that. There's no way. You mentioned specifically the patience and the kindness that it would take, in approaching somebody. So this is prerequisite for bringing forth those children. And if I'm looking at myself and my imbalance, I might have no problem loving somebody, accepting, people the way they are and working with them. I am not known for my joy. And it perplexes me because there's nothing wrong in my life. There's not. I find silly things to gripe about, like traffic lights and stuff like that. Just ask my family when we're riding around. But I'm like, I think I'm disproportionate in my joy. And, if I'd build a sermon out of this, I'd go on with that, but I don't have that much time. But it's something to consider, and Jesus, he spoke about it. But in that same passage, he says, and they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. And here we are back to Romans 7 and 8 again. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. So the invitation is in that passage. The first question is, are you Christ's? Right? For what? You're all children of God by faith in Christ Jesus, right? For as many of you has been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. And then the ultimate question is, if you've accomplished that, if you're living in the Spirit, are you walking in the Spirit? Because it would be impossible to be walking in the Spirit and not producing that fruit of the Spirit, but producing the fruit of the flesh, as we talked about in class tonight. Y'all almost just took my whole lesson from me if it wasn't for the trees. But I think what I want us to see is this ideal tree. Is the one that has all the beautiful physical attributes with which God designed it to accomplish the spiritual purpose and having all of those spiritual attributes. And we need to have that balance. We appreciate it in the physical world, and God appreciates it in the spiritual world. So that's what I wanted to leave you with tonight. Are you Christ's? And if you are you walking in the Spirit? If not, please come while we stand, while we sing.